Canada faces hurdles to replace massive U.S. market, but what Donald Trump doesn't realize is that his tariff war is turning into his biggest strategic blunder yet. While Trump pounds his chest about 35% tariffs and threats of annexation, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is systematically dismantling Trump's leverage and building something much more powerful: economic independence from America's increasingly unstable trade policies. This isn't just another trade dispute. This is the story of how Trump's signature policy tool, tariffs, became the very weapon that's pushing America's closest ally away from Washington and toward a future where the U.S. needs Canada far more than Canada needs the U.S. And the numbers tell a devastating story for Trump's America First agenda. To understand how spectacularly Trump's tariff strategy is backfiring, we need to look at what actually happened when he started this trade war. In November 2024, fresh off his election victory, Trump threatened 25% tariffs on all Canadian goods, claiming they would remain until Canada stopped the flow of fentanyl and illegal immigration. The problem? Less than 1% of fentanyl entering the U.S. comes from Canada, while 98% comes from Mexico. Trump was essentially punishing his most reliable ally for a problem that barely involved them. But here's where Trump's miscalculation becomes clear. Canada didn't panic. Instead, Prime Minister Mark Carney, a former central banker who understands global economics better than Trump ever will, began a methodical campaign to reduce Canada's dependence on the American market. When Trump imposed his initial tariffs in March 2025, Canada responded with strategic counter-tariffs on $20 billion worth of American goods, with plans to expand to $85 billion. This wasn't emotional retaliation, this was calculated economic warfare. The scale of Trump's strategic error becomes apparent when you examine the trade relationship he's destroying. Canada is America's second largest trading partner, with bilateral trade comprising about 1/3 of Canada's economy and 3% of America's. But here's the kicker: Canada runs a $63.3 billion trade surplus with the U.S., meaning America needs Canadian goods more than Canada needs American markets.
To be clear, Canada currently has the best deal of any of the United States trading partners in the world. 85% of our trade with the United States has no tariffs. It's tariff-free. And we have the lowest average tariff rate of any country. But we've learned a lesson over the course of the last several months, is that our relationship with the U.S. is changing. And we can't rely on our most important trading relationship as we once did.
Trump is essentially taxing American consumers to punish a country that's already sending more value south than it receives north. Carney's response has been nothing short of masterful. While Trump raged about annexation and threw around increasingly desperate threats, Carney calmly told him at the White House in May 2025, "As you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale. We're sitting in one right now. Having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign, it's not for sale." Trump's response? A weak, time will tell. The kind of thing you say when you know you've been outmaneuvered. But Carney wasn't just delivering zingers, he was building Canada's economic fortress. In September 2025, he unveiled a comprehensive Buy Canadian strategy that represents the most significant shift in Canadian economic policy in decades. The plan includes billions in funding for domestic industries, a complete overhaul of government procurement to prioritize Canadian suppliers, and massive investments in sectors hit by both American and Chinese tariffs. The genius of Carney's approach becomes clear when you look at the details. Canada exports $13 billion in aluminum and $17 billion in iron and steel to the United States. Trump's 25% tariffs on these goods add $7.5 billion in annual costs. Instead of begging Trump to reconsider, Carney announced that Canada would restrict and reduce foreign steel imports and ensure Canadian steel and other Canadian materials are prioritized in construction of major infrastructure projects. He's not just replacing American demand, he's building domestic demand that makes American markets less critical. The lumber industry provides a perfect example of how Trump's tariffs are accelerating Canadian independence. When Trump imposed sectoral tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber, Carney responded with $700 million in loan guarantees and $500 million in competitiveness investments for the industry. But the real stroke of genius was tying this to Canada's housing strategy. The Build Canada Homes program will provide $25 billion in financing for private sector home builders, using Canadian lumber and Canadian workers. We will be our own best customer by relying on more Canadian lumber for Canadian projects, Carney declared. Meanwhile, Trump's tariff war is creating exactly the opposite effect in America. The Tax Foundation estimates that Trump's 2025 tariffs will increase federal revenues by $171.7 billion, making them the largest tax hike since 1993. These aren't taxes on foreign countries, they're taxes on American consumers and businesses. Every Canadian aluminum sheet, every piece of lumber, every manufactured good that American companies need is now more expensive, making U.S. businesses less competitive globally. The agricultural sector reveals another dimension of Trump's strategic failure. Canada's canola industry faced a devastating 75.8% tariff from China as part of broader trade tensions. Instead of leaving farmers to struggle, Carney announced a $370 million package to help canola producers pivot to biofuel production. He's literally turning trade punishment into industrial opportunity, using Chinese tariffs as justification to build domestic biofuel capacity that reduces dependence on both Chinese and American markets. But perhaps the most telling sign of Trump's desperation came in his escalation pattern. When his initial 25% tariffs failed to bring Canada to heel, he raised them to 35% in July 2025. When that didn't work, he started threatening even higher rates. This is the behavior of someone losing control, not someone negotiating from strength. Each escalation makes American goods more expensive while pushing Canada further toward economic independence. Carney's response to Trump's 35% threat was a masterclass in diplomatic chess. Instead of matching Trump's hysteria, he issued a measured statement. Throughout the current trade negotiations with the United States, the Canadian government has steadfastly defended our workers and businesses. We will continue to do so as we work towards the revised deadline of August 1st. Canada has made vital progress to stop the scourge of fentanyl in North America. He then calmly outlined Canada's massive investments in border security, making clear that Canada was doing its part while Trump was the one escalating unnecessarily. The energy sector provides perhaps the most dramatic example of how Trump's tariffs are backfiring. Canada is a major supplier of oil and electricity to the United States, particularly to northern states. Ontario Premier Doug Ford initially threatened to impose a 25% tariff on electricity exports to America, potentially affecting 1.5 million American homes. While Ford backed down after negotiations, the threat demonstrated Canada's leverage. America needs Canadian energy more than Canada needs American markets for it. Trump's fundamental misunderstanding of modern economics is becoming increasingly apparent. He seems to believe that tariffs are paid by foreign countries, when in reality they're paid by American importers and passed on to American consumers. Canada exports $4 billion in copper and $1.5 billion in nickel to the United States annually. When Trump slaps tariffs on these critical minerals, he's making American manufacturing more expensive while creating incentives for Canada to find other buyers. The automotive sector illustrates the interconnected nature of North American manufacturing that Trump's tariffs are destroying. Canada and the United States have deeply integrated supply chains built over decades. When Trump imposed 25% tariffs on auto parts in March 2025, he wasn't just hurting Canadian suppliers, he was making American car manufacturers less competitive globally. Every Ford, GM, and Chrysler vehicle that uses Canadian parts is now more expensive to produce. Carney's strategic patience is paying dividends in ways Trump clearly didn't anticipate. While Trump was tweeting threats and making demands, Carney was quietly building relationships with other trading partners. The legal challenges to Trump's tariffs are mounting, with multiple cases filed in American federal courts arguing that his use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act exceeds presidential authority.
Yeah, and really simply, the founding document in the United States is our Constitution. And the Constitution specifically says that the power to tariff rests with Congress. So that is their power. Congress gave some of that power to the president under really specific laws. The one law that they didn't give the president that power is under his emergency powers. And so President Trump is the first president to ever use this emergency power in an attempt to implement tariffs. And he did it in a way that is contrary and at odds with all of the other statutes and laws that were passed by Congress to do tariffs. So it's pretty simple. It's an abuse of an emergency power in a way that Congress didn't intend. And therefore, all of those actions are unconstitutional.
In May 2025, the Court of International Trade declared Trump's tariff executive orders invalid as contrary to law and permanently enjoined their enforcement. While Trump's administration appealed, the legal uncertainty adds another layer of instability to his trade policy. Carney's most sophisticated move has been his handling of the USMCA review process. The United States-Mexico-Canada agreement is up for review in 2026, and instead of entering those negotiations from a position of weakness, Carney is building Canadian leverage every day. By reducing dependence on American markets and building domestic alternatives, he's ensuring that Canada enters those talks as an equal partner, not a supplicant. The broader geopolitical implications of Trump's tariff war are becoming clear. America's allies are watching how Trump treats Canada, arguably America's most loyal partner, and drawing conclusions about their own relationships with Washington. If Trump will impose punitive tariffs on Canada over fabricated concerns about fentanyl, what will he do to other allies over real disagreements? Trump's tariff strategy is also undermining American soft power in ways he clearly doesn't understand. For decades, America promoted free trade and open markets as core principles of the international order. By abandoning those principles for short-term political gains, Trump is encouraging other countries to pursue protectionist policies that ultimately hurt American exporters. The environmental implications add another layer to Trump's strategic failure. Canada is a crucial partner in North American energy security and climate goals. By treating Canada as an economic adversary rather than a strategic ally, Trump is complicating cooperation on everything from critical mineral supply chains to renewable energy projects. These are exactly the areas where America needs reliable partners to compete with China. Carney's September 2025 economic strategy announcement represented a watershed moment in Canada-US relations. Canada's trade diversification efforts are accelerating, with new agreements and partnerships that reduce dependence on American markets.
This will directly help transform our country into an energy superpower. This project will double LNG Canada's production capacity and make it the second largest liquefied natural gas facility of its kind in the world. It will diversify our trading partners, help meet global demand for secure, low-carbon energy, and support tens of thousands of new high-paying careers.
The message is clear. If America wants to be an unreliable trading partner, Canada will find reliable alternatives. In fact, Carney has unveiled plans for Canada to become an energy superpower through massive LNG expansion that will double production capacity, making it the second largest liquefied natural gas facility globally, while diversifying trading partners and creating tens of thousands of high-paying jobs. The timing of Trump's tariff war couldn't be worse for American interests. Global supply chains are already strained from pandemic disruptions and geopolitical tensions. By adding uncertainty to the US-Canada relationship, historically one of the world's most stable trading partnerships, Trump is encouraging businesses to diversify away from American suppliers and markets. Canadian companies that might have expanded into US markets are now looking at Europe, Asia, and other regions instead. Perhaps most damaging for Trump's long-term strategy is how his tariff war is affecting American perceptions of trade relationships. Business leaders who once saw Canada as America's most reliable trading partner now view the relationship as politically unstable. This uncertainty premium makes Canadian suppliers less attractive not because of their quality or pricing, but because Trump's unpredictability makes long-term contracts risky. By declaring that Canada was moving from reliance to resilience, from uncertainty to prosperity, he was essentially announcing Canada's economic independence from American whims.
For decades.
Prime Minister Mark Carney laying out what he says Canadians will see out of today's first suite of approved major projects, including LNG expansion in British Columbia, an Ontario nuclear plant, and prairie mining. Reaction from the opposition and provincial premiers was swift.
What he's done today is announce that he's going to send an email to an office that isn't even fully staffed up yet. This is pathetic.
When I looked at the first 5 projects, I thought, finally they get it, because it's all the projects that have been difficult to build. It's mining projects, it's LNG Canada.
To see our federal government in Canada talk about Manitoba having a potential project of national importance, I don't know if we've had that since Manitoba entered Confederation, or perhaps since the railroads were constructed.
This wasn't anti-American rhetoric, it was a pragmatic response to American unreliability. The federal government has announced 5 major infrastructure projects for fast-tracking, including LNG expansion, nuclear plants, and mining projects that will reduce Canada's economic dependence on the United States. The numbers don't lie about who's winning this trade war. While Trump's tariffs are generating revenue for the U.S. Treasury, they're also making American businesses less competitive and American consumers poorer. Meanwhile, Carney's strategic investments are building Canadian industrial capacity that will outlast Trump's presidency and create long-term economic advantages. Trump's biggest miscalculation may be his assumption that Canada has no alternatives to American markets. Modern global trade networks provide multiple options for countries with valuable resources and products. Canada's oil can go to Asia, its lumber to Europe, its minerals to anyone willing to pay market prices. America, meanwhile, still needs those resources regardless of where they come from. The agricultural implications of Trump's trade war extend beyond immediate tariff impacts. Canadian farmers and food processors are increasingly looking at global markets rather than American ones for expansion. This shift has long-term implications for American food security and agricultural competitiveness. When Canadian suppliers find reliable customers elsewhere, they're less likely to return to volatile American markets. Carney's handling of sectoral challenges shows sophisticated economic thinking that Trump's team clearly lacks. When faced with Chinese tariffs on canola, instead of just complaining, Carney created a biofuel incentive program that transforms agricultural products into energy products. When faced with American steel tariffs, he created domestic demand through infrastructure requirements. This is economic jujitsu, using opponents' force against them. The technology sector provides another example of Trump's strategic blindness. Canada is home to significant tech talent and companies that have been integrated into North American supply chains. Trump's unpredictable trade policies are encouraging these companies to diversify their operations and partnerships away from American markets. Silicon Valley's loss is becoming Toronto and Vancouver's gain. Trump's tariff war is also revealing fundamental weaknesses in American manufacturing capacity. Decades of offshoring have left America dependent on imports for many critical materials and components. When Trump imposes tariffs on Canadian aluminum or steel, he's not creating American alternatives overnight. He's just making American manufacturers pay more for inputs they can't easily replace. The infrastructure implications of Canada's new economic strategy are staggering. Carney's commitment to using Canadian materials in major projects represents billions in domestic demand that previously might have gone to American suppliers. The Build Canada Homes program alone represents $25 billion in construction activity that will prioritize Canadian suppliers. Trump's tariffs aren't just losing existing business, they're losing future opportunities. Perhaps most telling is how Trump's own supporters are beginning to question the tariff strategy. American businesses in border states are feeling the immediate impacts of higher costs and supply chain disruptions. Farmers who export to Canada are seeing their markets threatened by retaliatory measures. Even some Republican politicians are expressing concerns about the economic impacts on their constituents. The financial markets are also sending clear signals about Trump's tariff strategy. Canadian companies focused on domestic markets are outperforming those dependent on American exports, while American companies reliant on Canadian inputs are struggling with increased costs. The market is essentially betting on Carney's strategy over Trump's. Carney's August 2025 decision to selectively remove some Canadian tariffs while maintaining others on steel, aluminum, and autos showed sophisticated strategic thinking. By matching U.S. exemptions for USMCA-compliant goods while maintaining pressure on sectors where Canada has leverage, he demonstrated that Canada could be both reasonable and firm. Trump's all-or-nothing approach looks crude by comparison. The environmental sector provides a perfect example of how Trump's short-term thinking is creating long-term problems. Canada and the United States have been natural partners in developing clean energy supply chains and critical mineral extraction. Trump's tariff war is encouraging Canada to develop these partnerships with other countries instead, potentially leaving America behind in the global transition to clean energy. As we look toward the future, the patterns are clear. Trump's tariff war was supposed to bring Canada to heel and force better trade terms for America. Instead, it's accelerating Canadian economic independence and creating a more self-reliant neighbor that's less dependent on American markets. Carney's patient, strategic response is building long-term Canadian advantages, while Trump's impulsive escalations are creating short-term American costs. The irony is perfect. Trump's America First strategy is making America less central to its closest ally's economic future. Every Canadian factory that retools for domestic markets, every supply chain that diversifies away from American suppliers, every trade relationship that develops with non-American partners represents a permanent reduction in American economic influence. Mark Carney understood some thing that Trump clearly didn't. In the modern global economy, reliable partnerships matter more than raw market size. By proving that America under Trump is an unreliable partner, Trump's tariff war is encouraging not just Canada, but other allies to reduce their dependence on American markets and suppliers. The short-term revenue from tariffs pales in comparison to the long-term loss of economic influence and partnership. Trump wanted to make America great again. Instead, his tariff war with Canada is making Canada more independent, more self-reliant, and ultimately more competitive. That's not the art of the deal. That's the art of strategic self-defeat. And Mark Carney has been the masterclass instructor.